How is everyone? Come join me.
Hello, hello.
Yeah. Hello, hello.
We're going to have a very candid conversation today about, I think, what's been missing in our perspective of intrusion suppression, as I'll call it. The adversaries of today want to take over your digital transformation and use it to attack your customers, as evidenced in the recent education sector breaches. So we want some ground truth to provide us with guidance and strategic thought on what can you do to improve your security posture, but how do you avoid that type of island hop in general. So I'll begin with you, Shira. What is the worst weaponization of AI threat that you consider today?
So, may not be the most popular answer, but I do believe it is a very important, significant answer, which is deepfakes. Deepfakes, I talk a lot about the human factors piece, how people try to trick people based on human emotion, what they know, what they feel they know, what they can trust, and how they trust. Deepfakes have infiltrated our lives, both personally and within organizations itself. When it hits us personally, we get nervous, we feel very connected to it, and we act without stopping to think and really verify and validate. And when it comes to organizations, it's very similar as well. Can we trust what we're seeing? If we don't, will we be held liable if it's actually really real? So we're playing with the back and forths of what we do, how to trust, how to deal with that. But that also brings us to know your customer. How do you know your customer is everything they are supposed to be or say they are, based on the profiles, based on what you're seeing out there, based on what you're reading out there, and everything coming to you at warp speed? So in a concise way, I would say deepfakes.
Okay. Jeff, what type of AI-dependent threat most concerns you, given that you've created a new governance model?
Yeah, so I think AI-dependent threats, I mean, the biggest thing for me is just the fact that it's helping adversaries scale so much. That's the part that really concerns me the most from an AI-dependent perspective, is that, you know, as you saw from Anthropic's presentation yesterday, which I thought was great, like just the lowering of the skill set necessary to launch attacks, the ability to scale attacks so much faster, the ability to make social engineering better, all of those things are kind of what scare me. That's the biggest thing. It's just the fact that it's taking something that used to require discipline and operational focus and all of those things and turning it into something that virtually anyone can do. Like, I think about the stuff I build with Claude Code that I have no idea how it actually works. I could never build that myself, but now I can. And I'm like, well, the difference between me and them is just the fact that I'm trying to build, I don't know, something goofy that like gives me a dashboard or whatever, and they're trying to build ransomware. That's the main difference. So I think that's the kind of dependency thing that scares me the most, is just how much this is lowering the bar in terms of adversary skill.
And I would love your thoughts specific to a conversation that we had the other day on supply chain and worst case scenarios there.
Oh, so I'm going to talk about a Vercel hack that happened. For people who don't know what Vercel is, it's a very popular hosting provider for people who build AI. And the hack that happened was they got impacted by someone downloading a Roblox cheat code, which happened to be a malware. And the way they got access to the organization was through a Google Auth, which a lot of us have done willingly. We just approve. That's what the individual did. But I think what was being called out already is the fact that we are in an era of AI-assisted cybercrime. A couple of days ago, Google came out and found, the Google threat team came out and said that they discovered the first 0-day by AI-assisted tools. So they fully believe, they stopped it, but they fully believe that it is at that scale. Now, there is a AI-assisted cybercrime coming, and supply chain is going to be the easiest way out people are going to come from.
So given a lot of the conversations have been about cyber criminals, let's talk about APT threat actors. Who do you think, Cheryl, I'll begin with you, which group set do you think is the most significant?
So I know where you're going with this with the question, but I'm going to answer it a little differently.
Please.
I think you're looking for the bad actors and which areas we should focus on, but I think we are our worst enemies. I think when we're looking at where the threats are coming, I think tremendous amount internally because it's not done correctly. We talk about shadow AI, we talk about organizations that they don't have proper governance. We're talking about how do you validate, how do you trust, how do you move action forward and take action based on what you see and what you know. Note, if you don't have proper governance within organizations, which most of them don't, they're acting too quickly, moving too fast, And that's leaving all these open areas for the attacks to come through the bad actors. So a little bit of a different answer, but I believe this is the one.
I concur. I mean, it's a telemetry challenge, which
Correct.
needs to be informed by threat intelligence in general. And to that point, I feel that APT29 is probably the most significant threat actor because they're constantly changing their TTPs.
Correct.
For the two of you, do you have a dog in the fight? Is there
Well, so first I want to say, what kind of despicable person cheats at Roblox? Can we? We didn't spend enough time on that. That could be a whole session. Find me later. No, for me, I think what's interesting about this is that I think the one that's going to be the most significant is one we don't know about yet. Because just like we have to adapt inside our enterprise for something like co-work or autonomous agents or OpenClaw or something else, there's going to be a threat actor group that adapts just as quickly, and who's the most adept with that? I think that's going to be fascinating to see, hopefully not experience, but so I'm sort of looking at like, hey, who is the next big time threat group that adapts very, very quickly to absorbing these technologies and using them operationally in a way that's incredibly powerful and interesting? I don't think we know yet, because I think just like any of these groups, they're going to have to adapt, and so I'm anxious to sort of see what emerges as a result of this in terms of the new threat actor that we don't know about yet.
And Ashish, you and I had an interesting conversation the other day about how to deal with shadow AI. I'd like for you to flesh out your strategy therein and
Sure.
explain to the audience.
I'll probably lay out the scene a bit. I think the biggest worry in all the conversations that I've had is just Bob in accounting downloading an AI tool, which was never reviewed and is pushing code into production without even them knowing. Now, the scenario, and without naming the company, essentially what happened was everyone in the organization was asked to deploy more code into production because, hey, it's easy using coding assistant tools. We should all be doing it. We should be producing more, speed, velocity, everything. And what they resulted in doing when the pull request came in for approval, what they found was they had made, or at least they didn't realize it, they made a resource public, which should technically be private. Now, most people who don't work in the technology field, they don't really know when security people say, hey, it's public. What does that really mean? I guess as technology people, we know what that means, but Bob did not know what that was. Fortunately, it came with a pull request and was stopped, but that's kind of the threat that's turning into the shadow AI that we're talking about, not having visibility, as was called out earlier, early today, yesterday as well. Having shadow AI that is created by your internal threat actor, which, by the way, previously we used to think threat actor is a low probability because how upset can Bob really be at any given point in time? But today, Bob has a lot more power if he or she decides to just deploy AI tools for their productivity.
So
Can
for
I add
me,
on one thing for that,
please.
if you don't mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a minute, when you're talking about shadow AI and how do you counteract that, sometimes, as we talked about yesterday and even other discussions today, sometimes when organizations are telling their folks of tasks that need to get done and how they need to get done, there's no feedback back. What do you need to get your task done? What would be helpful to you? Because obviously we don't want them to go around, take the tools that aren't verified through governance and everything else within the organization, but really understanding the needs of the employees within the organization, and obviously validating, verifying, making sure it falls within lines of the organization, but also hearing back what they need. If they feel part of the solution, that they're working together with the organization in a way that's going to have the best output, they're going to follow the rules.
And can I add to that? The other thing, too, for a lot of these tools, it's not Bob in accounting deciding to deploy it. It was bundled in graciously by the vendor of the application. Bob didn't ask for it. You didn't pay for it. You didn't conduct a third-party risk management review on it. It was updated in the terms of service, if that, or the EULA, and we all read those, right? Super close. We scroll through that, we click next, and all of a sudden our ERP has AI, and our design system has AI, and our CRM has AI, and our productivity suite has AI, and we may not have paid for it because they gave it to us for the first year for free until they're going to ask us to pay for it. So it's not even Bob downloaded it. It appeared in Bob's interface, and he clicked on it and said, sure, that sounds cool. I think I want to do that because it said it would make my job easier. And this is happening in so many situations. It's not the kind of rogue employee downloading OpenClaw. It's the fact that this app that doesn't seem to need AI added it because they had to, and now everyone has access to it, and you haven't reviewed it, and that fundamentally changes how this software operates, right? The employee is now interacting with this application that works so much differently than it did just 3 days ago.
So let's double click on that. Model poisoning is a big challenge. You've created a framework that is of import. Obviously, ISO has a framework that is of import. What gaps did you see in ISO's framework?
Yeah, so it's not so much the gaps we saw in any particular framework. I think the fundamental thing, so Forrester launched something called the Aegis framework at Black Hat in 2025, and it was because as we looked out there across various frameworks for AI security, we saw agents here, not coming, but already here, right, deployed in client organizations, and there was nothing specifically that talked about agentic security as a framework that you could apply. There were things like NIST AI RMF, there was ISO 42001, OWASP Top 10 for LLMs, but there was nothing that kind of broadly took it. So we ultimately created one to do a few things. First, establish something that specifically focused on agentic security. Concepts like least agency, securing intent. Least agency has now been taken up with OWASP. They're leveraging that for their agentic security, securing intents research we're working on now. But the other thing we did as a part of that is we recognized no CISO wants another acronym, and no CISO wants yet another framework, so we mapped our agentic security framework to other ones out there. So we took NIST AI RMF, we took ISO 42001,
Right.
MITRE, Atlas, et cetera, and we did a crosswalk to each one of those so that if you're using them, you can use Aegis. If you're using Aegis, you're preparing yourself for them, so that way clients could work with it. And I'd say the biggest thing that it breaks down right now, I introduce Aegis to a lot of clients. About 40% of the calls after they talk to me go to our folks in identity.
Yeah.
About 40% go to our folks in data security. And then about 20% go to our folks that cover vibe coding and app security. And that's kind of how it breaks down now. So those are probably the biggest areas that organizations I speak with are trying to solve for.
So share back to you real quick. We both know there's a governance crisis in cybersecurity because typically CISOs report to CIOs or CTOs. What would you do to enable or empower a CISO to have the right conversation with the CEO or the board?
I touched on a little bit yesterday. I like that question a lot. I think a lot of organizations are very siloed. Everybody has their own particular job, their own particular outcomes, their own particular motivations, and they're incentivized that way to get it done. So you need that digital transformation across the organization to have those conversations, but incentivize the management team to work together for the greater good of the organization. Security and operations need to go hand in hand. The plan needs to go hand in hand together. But it's also really understanding what the risks are and what is needed within the organization to move forward. Everybody is motivated to move better, quicker, not quacker,
Yeah.
faster, stronger, right? Move along, quack if you want, that's okay. But get it done right. So a lot of times, obviously, as we spoke about and we're speaking about a lot, and I'm sure all the CISOs here are struggling with budgets. Budgets are not enough. They've decreased your budgets, they've decreased your personnel, and now you're tasked with implementing AI across your organization, both for security and operations and everything across the board. And now there's a struggle.
Can I double click on that real quick?
Please.
So I think this is a brand protection issue. And I think that if you're missing budget, maybe the CMO, I said it, I know this is a marketing event, I think maybe the CMO could support the initiatives of the CISO to ensure the sustainability and protection of the brand, particularly in many of the outbound, outward-facing aspects of the stack or infrastructure.
Well, of course, and messaging is a big part of that, of course, right? Everything is reputational. When we think about reputational for an organization, it's not just outcomes, it's not just breaches, it's how are you presenting the company, who is the company, and how does that interface with our ecosystem as a whole?
Exactly.
Well, I need to actually throw something at you, because I know you like to shake things up a little bit. So what's the importance of 1911 to you?
It was the beginning of aviation warfare. I was an Italian biplane that was spying on the Turks. And now we're dealing with autonomous strike vehicles. I think it's very comparative to what we're suffering from with the revolution that we're seeing, is that the adversaries, the first adopters are actually the adversaries, and they're using it quite well, and they're trying to colonize infrastructure. So how do we defend against that? And I'll turn it over to you, because you've been waiting patiently to be engaged here. What are your thoughts on the CISO being empowered and how to empower the CISO themselves?
I think, first of all, they should definitely follow the three-step framework that you had in the previous one. I think definitely get the budget. The three things that I have been repeatedly talking about to a lot of people. I think visibility is going to be at least a conversation that we would have for the next year as long as AI keeps going. I wish I could tell you guys that AI has now hit a benchmark, it's going to stop. No, unfortunately, it's going to continue going. So the shadow AI part that we're all talking about is not going to disappear. It's going to be there, a long conversation. The second part is being able to have observability on things like you care about in the organization and by observability, just to put some context, we spoke about Mythos yesterday when Rob from Anthropic was on the stage. The genuine reality of today is that, yes, there are more exploits being found. The number of hours or seconds it takes to be exploited is a lot less than 24 hours for a lot more people than normal. The third thing is the part that I want to emphasize on. It's not that every vulnerability is going to be impacting us, but can I quickly identify, am I exposed to this? It's going to be the number one thing that you decide. The observability is where it's going to help you with. It's going to help you decide whether, am I just putting all tools down and we go and jumping on an all-hands call, or are we basically going, OK, I can ignore this because I know I'm not exploited. The third one, which is speaking the business language of velocity. Security for a long time, and we spoke about, I think product security is a great example. DevSecOps was supposed to be a thing, and some people even went down the path of having a DevSecOps engineer. I feel like the same evolution is almost happening, but almost a 10 times speed with AI. It's no longer the cloud space where I did a lot of work, got a lot of budget approval, had a lot of risk management, but that was much more slower. I didn't have to worry about, I'm going to go back to Bob. Hopefully there's no Bob from accounting over here, but I'm going to go for the Bob from accounting example. I didn't have to worry about that at that particular point. So velocity is almost, we're trying to fight against the velocity of AI innovation, or at least trying to keep up with it. So those three things are at least very much important, top of mind for many people I'm talking to.
So let me ask all three of you a very binary question. If you were a CISO today, would you spend money on technology or services first?
Ooh. I can go first.
OK, we'll go down this way.
I'll probably go, I would not start in technology. I would start on talking to people around, because I could have a AI standard of usage, like a usage standard, but if no one follows it, there's no point in deploying any technology. I think technology is, at least for me personally, is a phase 2. Phase 1 is I need to talk to Bob, the CTO, every business unit, and have a way of, people call it AI governance council. A lot of people already have that. Having some way of being involved with that in your organization would be key in stopping that, I guess, the brewing storm that may be in your organization. So at least I personally would go for talk to your peers first, make some friends, then technology.
So for me, I'm a services guy. I grew up in services. I cover security services, but I want to be kind of specific about this. I would probably spend on services first, but I would not spend on consulting services. I would also not fall into the trap of believing forward deployed engineers or anything but, one, a permanent cost that is masquerading as a one-time cost, because they are very much a permanent cost, FDEs are, and they're just a consultant, to be clear. I would go for operational services. I would look at things like managed detection and response. I would look at things like that, because one of the things we often talk about is visibility, and I agree. In fact, the very first report I wrote on AI security talked about the fact that we need to start with visibility. But recently there was a AI SOC vendor, I won't mention names. First of all, if you go to their careers page, they're hiring for a lot of SOC analysts. A little bit of a warning sign for you there, folks. Second thing is they launched a service, but they're an AI SOC, and they said they could do all of it with AI. So I asked the question, why'd you launch a service? And they said, this is a quote. Won't mention the vendor name again. This is a quote. Well, the alert's got to go somewhere. And I was like, but I thought the AI did that. And they were like, well, no, not so much. The AI really just kind of summarizes. That's the part they don't say out loud. So my point is that we can maximize visibility, but we've got to be able to do something with it. And pretty consistently what I see is that being able to leverage something like MDR that gives you the expertise of threat hunting, the expertise of response, the expertise of detection engineering, what it really does is that as your security team changes, as you lose people, as you gain people, it keeps you at a kind of consistent baseline. You're never going from having a really experienced team that all then leaves at the same time to go to the same place to having a brand new team. Instead, you're able to keep at a little bit higher level because you can onboard people and have them almost trained by your provider. So I would go something like operational services, run services like MDR, so that I can then figure out what my staffing model needs to look like for the technology and the broader services.
Thank you.
Great answers from both of you. Obviously, I agree with a lot of what you said, of course, with a little caveat, and I'm not going to mention which services, which technology, but I believe that they have to almost go hand in hand at a specific level based on your organization. There's never one size fits all. It's really understanding the scope of the organization, the needs of the organization, and what they're facing today.
Yes.
And there's a lot of organizations that have very different needs and very different type of attack vectors that are coming towards them and holes within the organization they need to button up. So obviously you need both, but it's at scale.
Very fair.
I was going to add something in there. I was going to just call out the fact that just because we're talking about AI doesn't mean whatever we have done for decades goes away.
Yep.
Like the defense in depth still works. The first principle that NVIDIA person spoke about definitely still works. It's just that the threat model we had from before now needs to adapt to the newer model that we are moving into, the more AI we use as an organization. Everything that we've done so far is still going to work. Just want to put that caveat out there.
No, it's a good point. One thing I talk about a lot, because I research securing emerging technology, and what we find consistently is that 9 times out of 10, emerging technologies exacerbate existing problems more than they introduce new and novel threats. And that includes Gen AI.
Yeah.
Take something like IoT, right? From years ago, if you had a network visibility problem, you added a bunch of devices to your network that now communicated. That gave you a bigger network visibility problem. Now with OT security, you're adding connected devices, so you need visibility. AI, you're now adding, take agents, for example, you're now adding more new, different identities to your network. So if you had an identity problem before, you have a bigger identity problem now. So these things with GRC, with IAM, with data security, application security, threat management, security ops, this is exacerbating those problems. It's a different attack vector, but the issue itself, it's dealing with something you dealt with before, but now it's more consequential, and there's a lot more scale.
Well, also on that, I mean, the more consequential you are as an organization or your business partners are, the more likely you're going to deal with an adversary that's going to try to island hop through your infrastructure. So if we're trying to suppress an adversary that wants to use your infrastructure to attack him, what would your top 3 recommendations be?
Well, definitely really assess, really understand what your risks are and where they're coming from. Understand what you have in place and what needs to be filled in. I was just going to go back just for a second to the other question. I just wanted to add in a small piece that might feel very elementary, but really not. Zero trust for AI needs to be implemented, not zero trust for humans as well, because of everything that's been brought into the organization. It needs to be buttoned up appropriately. So I'm sorry.
No, you need continuous verification, though, in today's environment, right, to trust?
I'm sorry?
I said you would need continuous verification in order to trust.
Correct.
Given
Continuous verification to prove trust. And how do you prove trust? This is a conversation that we talk about all the time now in our industry. What is trust? How do you establish trust? How do you then make decisions based on what you know that you think is trustworthy, and how do you move forward on that? Right? You only can make decisions about what you know and how you know it. So breaking down within the organization, tabulating the data that you have, understanding where things are coming from, and the buildups of how to do those steps appropriately within your organization. Yes, I could talk about a lot of tools and a lot of ways to do it, but I like when I speak to audiences, it's really the human factors piece of it. What do you see? How do you do things? How do you build up what you're looking to prove? And how do you backtrack it and actually have a deliverable in that sense?
So from my perspective, I would say compromise assessments are necessary at all times. I think attack path mapping is pivotal. I also think it'd be interesting if you did attack path mapping from internal of your network to understand what could be done to the outside world from it to prevent the type of phenomenon I've described. Obviously, virtual shielding is imperative given the arms race that we've talked about ad nauseum today and yesterday, but I would say this, that we have to respect our adversaries. And so, much like previous questions that I asked about elevation of CISO, even here our CISO reports to our leader, and it's very important that shift of culture. If I may ask you then the following question for boards, how do you shift their culture?
I'm going to jump on that one, just because I talk to boards a lot. One of the things I think that's missing in the boardroom, and touched on it yesterday as well, is the education of boards. We talked about earlier that there used to be a cybersecurity expert that we had to bring in the room when cyber is becoming a big deal, even though it has been for a very long time. Educating, bringing the CISO who's well educated in cybersecurity and even a real super expert in cybersecurity. Now here comes the world of AI. And I think it was like 2.7%, 2.2 something, don't hold me to that number, but something around there, of board members who are really well versed in AI and understand AI. So when organizations are dealing like this and really don't have that education or know-how or the tools to make decisions or understand what's needed in an organization, it's not like you don't know, I'll tell you. How do you make decisions in life? I think you got to pull back again to the human nature of it. You don't want to be told what to do based on someone else's assumptions. You want to educate yourself so you could be part of something and make a decision based on something you know. Yes, I want input as well, but I also want to know it for myself. And I think it's super important for whoever's within the organization, the C-suite, to go in, present to the board and say, you need to know what we know. Obviously, they're not going to be experts, but understanding the risks, understanding the opportunities, understanding what it could do for your workforce as a whole, but also mitigating risk that is coming from all these advancements within AI.
Can I touch on that real quick?
Please.
So when I was at the World Bank many, many years ago, they didn't believe that my thesis that PKI would not save the financial sector from cyber attacks. And so we ran the first ever penetration test against the World Bank and IMF Treasury. And they wanted to ignore the results of that. But if you formulated a report out of that penetration test and then you put it on the desks of the leadership, they can't ignore it because it's not theoretical. It's not like a vulnerability assessment. It's a true, viable penetration test that demonstrates the fact that you are at risk now, if not already compromised. And I think that's an excellent way for you to inform and convince at the same time.
I like your points on that. Sorry, just to finish one more point, but I like what you said about real-world examples and bringing it in front of you. You know, talking theoretically in general is great for people, but how do they really digest and feel understanding that they feel that they can make a proper decision is real-world examples. What does it mean? Not theoretically numbers, numbers, numbers. If not, then. If not, how? And this is going to happen if we don't, and then play it out. Play out the scenarios, inform them, and then educate them and empower them.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I would say one of the things that drives me kind of insane is the mythologization, I don't know how to say that, of the board. I once had the CISO of a major technology company, I mean, a great, great big one, can't quote who it was, and I'll tell you why in a second. He said, when you look at most organizations, the board has two jobs. They set compensation for executives, and they can hire and fire the CEO. That's it. Now, the reason why we couldn't quote him is because he said, I might want another job one day, I'm not ready to retire yet. So we could not quote him in that report. The point there is that we have, what CISOs do a lot is they make the mistake of trying to tell the board as if the board is an operational entity that can dictate day-to-day decisions. And you talk to any executive out there, if you have a board that's operationally involved in your company, they have violated board principles of governance, and you have a board problem, exit immediately. Get out of that company. The CEO will not stick around if they're experienced. So a big part of this is learning that you need to talk in a language the board understands. The board understands trade-offs. The board understands risk, although I find most CISOs are not great at talking about risk, because if you're in a financial service institution, you're talking about risk, you're talking to people making multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar portfolio decisions on risk, and you're talking about whether or not you'll get breached once or twice a year. You're not having the same conversation. You just can't achieve that level of discussion with them, but it's about speaking to them in a language they understand. It's about using things like revenue, performance, successes, what your plans are, because you don't ever want to go in front of the board and be surprised by anything. You want to know every question they're going to ask. And at the end of the day, you said something really important earlier. I'm a huge Charlie Munger fan, and whenever I think about solving any problem, it just comes down to something very, very simple. Every single human being alive behaves based on incentives. If you know what they are, you can get what you want. It's that simple. There's nothing like reptilian about that or Machiavellian. We're people, and politics are just relationships at a macro level, so learn about those incentives and use that in how you communicate.
Social engineering at its best.
It absolutely is.
I was going to say, I have a very different perspective on the board. Fortunately, I get to work with some of the AI-forward companies who spend millions on AI, and what I find the board is aware that, yes, we have to use AI. Fortunately, people like Anthropic and OpenAI have done a great job of advertising mythos and cyber, so a lot of people are aware that, hey, there is a cybersecurity problem here. I don't know what that is, and they rely on a CISO to explain that to them. Now, fortunately, having spoken to people who have had access to the Mythos framework, one takeaway, even whenever that becomes GA, is that us security people are going to get a lot of volume of CVs. What would help us is the talent question you had in your slide earlier, which is amazing, because that ties in directly to what the general recommendation from most of the frontier model for the board is, that your security team, needs to have, I'm going to go back to visibility, observability, velocity, but also your team needs to build harnesses that are independent of models. Doesn't really matter, Mythos or whatever else comes to in the future. Boards that understand that we are using AI and are confused about cybersecurity, they do understand the fact that models are only going to get better from here. So we, as security team, we basically cannot solve the problem if we just rely on the model as, if I had Mythos, I would solve all security problems. That's not going to happen, because it'll be 2.0, 3.0, and it'll just continue.
You have to allow them to perceive what they cannot see.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that has to do with threat intelligence and incorporating that. One of the reasons I'm back and proud to be back here is I think the global threat intelligence that we have provides ground truth. And that informs our telemetry, and that makes us and our customers much more visible to the intrusion that, frankly, is inevitable. I mean, that's probably sacrilege to say. But success nowadays, to me, would be decreasing dwell time, limiting the blast radius, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that before we close?
Go ahead.
I mean, I agree with you.
I think you summed it up perfectly,
agree.
truly.
So
I
I'm
think
I was just
a
nodding.
lot of talk here, but you did
I
a
will,
good summation.
I'll quote Kaiser Sose, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to convince the world he didn't exist. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.